Ah, yes.
My father.
The man. The myth.
The walking cautionary tale in a Marks and Spencer polo shirt, who somehow managed to make passive aggression feel like an Olympic sport and win gold for team dysfunction. Honestly, if there's a patron saint of emotionally constipated dads, he's probably up there right now, polishing my dad's pint glass and muttering, "You've done us proud, mate." I used to think he was mysterious. You know, when I was 8 and didn't realize being deliberately vague and emotionally unavailable wasn't the same thing as deep. But it turns out he's not a man of mystery. He's a man of deflection, bad aftershave, and an uncanny ability to ruin every family gathering by the starter course. He's the kind of bloke who'll say, "I'm just playing devil's advocate," after saying something horrifically sexist, then act wounded when people don't thank him for his bravery. He has this presence, you know? Like a GCSE drama student trying to play a mafia boss. Except instead of organized crime, his big secret is a second mortgage and a business venture that somehow always ends in debt and tears. You know that brand of British dad who gets a bit too animated about Jeremy Clarkson, owns a world's best dad mug he bought for himself, and thinks therapy is just whinging with receipts. That's him. Through and through. And I used to idolize him, which is perhaps the saddest joke of all. I remember being 7 and thinking he was so smart because he could recite random facts during the weakest link. Now I realize he's just really loud and incredibly confident in being wrong. If arrogance had a postcode, it'd be his. And we'd still be expected to send a bloody thank you card. He's the kind of man who talks in riddles like, "You'll understand when you're older," and now that I am older, I realize it was just code for, "I'm emotionally unequipped to deal with this, and also I may or may not be lying." And I get it. He probably thought he was doing his best. But if that was his best, I'd hate to see his casual Tuesday. Growing up with him was like playing emotional Russian roulette. Would he be in a charming mood, quoting Shakespeare with a whiskey in hand? Or would he be glaring out the window muttering about how no one respects him anymore, while Mum refilled his glass like it was the national bloody duty? Spoiler, it was usually the second one. But the real kicker? Even with all of that, the bitterness, the backhanded compliments, the veiled threats disguised as jokes, there was still a part of me that wanted his approval. Which is precisely why this story is what it is. Because, fun fact, if your dad ever raises a glass to you with a strange smile and says, "To my millionaire son," and you're neither a son nor a millionaire, maybe don't drink it. Especially if he poured it himself. Especially if he's been acting like he's in a Netflix crime thriller. And especially if he's got a history of handling family conflict like he's auditioning for EastEnders.
So yeah,
that's where we begin. With him. The man who once put self-made entrepreneur in his Facebook bio and meant it.
But don't worry.
It gets worse. And funnier. And much, much messier. Welcome to the story of how my dad spiked my drink. And I, being my father's daughter in all the wrong ways, swapped it with his. Cheers, Dad. Wine glass. It was my mum's birthday. Which meant two things. Bad wine and worse company. And by worse, I obviously mean my dad, the human equivalent of a parking ticket that turns out to be a scam, but you still have to pay it because you're too emotionally exhausted to argue. We'd all gathered like we do every year, out of obligation, not affection. The family dinner. A sacred tradition where everyone pretends they haven't spent the last 364 days ignoring each other. Nothing says celebration like forced small talk and an undercooked chicken. Mum had made an effort, bless her. She wore her nice blouse, the one she saves for occasions that always end in someone crying in the downstairs loo. She had her hair done at Sharon's on Friday and told me she was feeling hopeful. Which, considering this family, is brave. Delusional, but brave. The dining room was lit like we were trying to summon a demon, just dim enough to hide the wrinkles, but bright enough to catch every eye roll. Dad had insisted on setting the mood, which basically meant turning the lights down so low it felt like a hostage situation with cake. We all sat around the table smiling like unpaid actors in a local Amdram production. Only no one knew the plot. The script was improvised, and the main theme was passive-aggressive silence with hints of unresolved trauma. Mum sat at the head of the table, like the reluctant queen of a crumbling dynasty. She looked around at us, me, my dad, Aunt Liz, Cousin Dean, who brought his latest girlfriend, who looked exactly like the last one, but slightly more terrified, and said, "Thank you for coming." Which, considering we all live within 20 minutes of each other, was a bit tragic. Dad, naturally, was already halfway through his second glass of red. The cheap one from Aldi, he insists tastes better than the posh stuff, if you let it breathe. He never lets anything breathe. Not wine, not people, not logic. I caught his eye.
He winked.
That's never a good sign. It's the same wink he gave me before he taught me how to lie to Mum about where the dog went. I was 10. The dog didn't go anywhere. He just didn't make it through the fireworks. Anyway, everyone was pretending to be functional. You know, like we hadn't all seen Dad lose his mind last Christmas because someone used the good knife to cut cheddar. Or like Dean hadn't borrowed $5,000 from Mum and never paid it back. Or like Aunt Liz hadn't loudly accused Cousin Jess of getting ideas above her station because she applied to uni. And there I was, holding a glass of suspiciously bitter Pinot Noir, wondering if this was what normal people did on Sundays. If they too sat at a table full of people they're legally and biologically tied to, fantasizing about escaping through the kitchen window. I took a sip and smiled. Because that's what you do, isn't it? In British families, we don't talk about our feelings. We pour them into casseroles and pretend the gravy will fix it. Mum opened her presents, a lavender bath set from Dean, a suspiciously re-gifted candle from Aunt Liz, and a card from Dad that just said cheers.
Cheers.
Not happy birthday, not love you, just cheers. Like, she'd just handed him a pint. And she still smiled. Like she always does. Like she has to. That's when it hit me. This woman deserves more. She deserves a proper birthday. Not just beige food, lukewarm wine, and the subtle threat of Dad having one too many. But, of course, it wasn't going to be that kind of night. Because Dad had something planned. Something special. And by special, I mean deeply unhinged. She looked lovely, by the way.
Mum.
Not Dad. Obviously. Dad looked like a midlife crisis dressed in whatever was clean and close to beige. But Mum looked like someone who deserved better. Always has. She had on her nice earrings, the ones she only wears for birthdays, funerals, and when she's trying to prove she's still got it at Morrison's. Hair freshly done, a dab of lippy, and that faint look in her eyes like she'd rather be anywhere else but here. Maybe Majorca. Maybe death. It's a coin toss. And she smiled through it. Through all of it. Through the burnt potatoes, the awkward silences, the "so, what are you doing with your life these days?" Comments lobbed at me like emotional grenades. She just sat there, sipping her warm white wine like it was an antidote for disappointment. And maybe in her case it actually is. I sometimes wonder how she does it. How she keeps showing up year after year, knowing full well she'll get a card signed in biro and a meal cooked by a man who thinks herbs are too continental. But she does. Because she's Mum. Because somehow, she still believes family means something, even if the rest of us are just clinging on out of guilt and habit. Meanwhile, I was just trying to survive the evening. Between Cousin Dean's monologue about investing in cryptocurrency, "You've got to get in now, yeah? Before the government bans it all," and Aunt Liz's graphic update on her diverticulitis, I was half convinced I'd died and come back as a guest on Loose Women, Hell Edition. Honestly, if I had to hear the phrase regular bowel movements one more time while trying to eat trifle, I was going to launch myself into the garden gnome. I sat there, nodding politely, doing the classic British thing where you act like everything's fine while internally screaming, "This cannot be my actual life." And then, of course, Dad decided it was time for a toast. Because what's a birthday dinner without a little chaos served in a wine glass? He stood up, wobbly, dramatic, clearly pleased with himself, and cleared his throat like he was about to announce he'd cured cancer or joined the Freemasons. Spoiler, he'd done neither. No, instead, he raised his glass and said, "To my millionaire son."
Pause.
I blinked, looked around. Me, not a son, not a millionaire. Unless we're counting emotional baggage as currency, in which case, I am bloody loaded. Mum gave him a look that said, "Not tonight, Steve." but he was already too far gone. Or too far deep in his delusions. Possibly both. I laughed. Just a little. Because what else do you do when your dad essentially forgets your gender, your job, and basic reality? All in one toast. This was the point where any normal person would think, oh, he's just drunk and weird. But something about it felt off. Even for him. His grin was too smug.
His eyes, too sharp.
And the way he handed me that glass, with this twisted sort of pride, like he'd done something clever. That was the moment I knew something was up. That gut-sinking, stomach-twisting realization that something in this already deranged dinner was about to go completely sideways. And still, Mum sat there smiling, holding us all together with wine and willpower, looking like a woman who'd quietly accepted that this, apparently, was her life. And I just thought, bloody hell, happy birthday, Mum. And then it happened. The bit in the story where everything goes a bit, EastEnders Christmas special, where the background noise fades, the lighting changes, and someone drops a bombshell, or in this case, something into a glass of wine. I was watching Dad out the corner of my eye, as one does when they've grown up in a house where everything's fine, is usually code for someone's about to flip the table. And there he was, hunched over the bottle like a dodgy magician, pouring wine into a glass. Not a glass.
My glass.
And then the stirring. Not a casual swirl. Oh no. This was deliberate. Slow. Like he was trying to fold an arsenic without bruising the tannins. It looked like he was auditioning for MasterChef, the Poison Edition. If Greg Wallace had walked in at that moment, he'd have gone, ooh, interesting technique. Bold. Slightly illegal. He turned, glass in hand, smile like a man who's just gotten away with tax fraud and thinks it's charming. Raises it, and says, to my millionaire son. Pause for dramatic effect.
Right.
Couple of quick issues with that statement, Dad. 1. I'm not a son. Haven't been, not planning to be, not experimenting. 2. I'm not a millionaire. If I was, I wouldn't be spending Sundays being emotionally dismantled over roast beef and a lukewarm trifle. 3. If we're toasting to delusions, may I suggest starting with to the man who once thought investing in ostrich farms was a good idea?
He hands me the glass.
Still smiling. Still radiating that smug energy of a man who's never said sorry in his life unless it was followed by, you made me do it. And I just froze. Not in fear, not exactly. More like that sort of paralysis you get when something is so utterly absurd, your brain needs a full system reboot. Like, did he just poison me? On Mum's birthday? In front of the trifle? He clinks his own glass against mine and downs half of his like he's at a uni fresher's pre-drinks, not casually committing domestic biowarfare. I stared at the wine in my hand, and suddenly, it didn't look red anymore. It looked loaded. Now, it could have been nothing. He could have just been swirling the dregs. Or adding his usual bit of a kick, which, knowing him, could be anything from extra salt to actual sedatives. But something was off. You know when you feel someone's lying, even when they haven't said a word.
That.
I glanced at Mum. She was still smiling, still doing that if I pretend hard enough this family's functional face. Her coping mechanism was Sauvignon Blanc and denial. Mine was sarcasm and not dying. So, in what I can only describe as a fight or flight or F***K moment, I did something. Something brilliantly petty. Something a therapist would call unresolved childhood trauma with a splash of cunning. I waited until his back was turned, and I swapped the glasses. Mine for his for mine. No big scene. No dramatic music. Just a quiet little clink, like the world's most emotionally charged episode of Come Dine With Me. He didn't notice. Of course he didn't. He never does. Too busy narrating his own fantasy, where I'm his golden child, and he's not the kind of man who poisons people he allegedly loves. And I just sat there, holding his glass now, watching him, watching me, waiting for something, anything, to make this whole thing make sense. Spoiler, it wouldn't. But in that moment, I felt powerful. Terrified, yes. Emotionally mangled, sure. But powerful. Because for once, I had the upper hand. even if I didn't know exactly what was in that wine. I knew he did. I froze. Proper freeze. The kind that creeps in slow, starting in your spine and crawling into your teeth. Like your body's clocking something you haven't fully registered yet, but it knows. It knows. And it's bracing. Half fear, half fury. Fear, because I just watched my father, the man who once told me, never trust anyone with weak tea, slip something dodgy into my drink and call it a toast. Fury, because this was supposed to be Mum's birthday, and somehow it had turned into the bloody Agatha Christie reboot no one asked for. And for a minute, just one tight, brittle minute, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe I was the problem, again. Because that's the Gaslight special, isn't it? The family recipe. Years of, are you sure that's what happened? And don't be so dramatic, and your father's just tired. Yes, well, so is my will to live, but you don't see me poisoning the Pinot. I glanced at the glass in front of me. It looked innocent enough. Then again, so did he. And so did the dog, before it bit 3 postmen and ruined Christmas '09. And I could have done what I always do. Swallowed it down. Smiled. Kept the peace like a good little daughter. Let him get away with whatever that was, again. But then something in me just snapped. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Not with a bang. No. More like the quiet snap of a dry twig. Or a knackered rubber band that's been holding the Hoover cord together since 2004. Because, honestly, I was done. Done being polite. Done doubting my gut. Done acting like he was the victim just because he could cry on command and quote Churchill while being a complete knob. So while he was fiddling with a serving spoon, probably looking for another chance to passive-aggressively insult Mum's roast, I did it. I swapped the glasses. No hesitation. No speech. No musical swell. Just a quick, clean switch. Mine for his. His for mine. You'd think I'd feel triumphant. Like some sort of dark avenger. But really, I just felt tired. Tired and slightly nauseous, though that could have been the parsnips. And I sat there, watching him, waiting. He raised the glass, his glass now, and grinned.
Grinned.
Like a man who thought he'd just outsmarted the system. Like a man who genuinely believed he was the cleverest one at the table, despite once burning spaghetti because he didn't trust instructions written in Italian. He took a sip. Big one. No hesitation. And all I could think was,
right.
So this is where we are now. This is what we do. We poison our children at Sunday lunch and call it bonding. I didn't say a word. Didn't flinch. Didn't cry. Didn't throw the plate at his head, which took restraint, honestly, because the opportunity was right there. Because in that moment, I realized something grim and kind of brilliant. I was the adult. I was the one thinking ahead. The one doing damage control. I was the one protecting myself from him. Which, let's be honest, makes me the only person in this family qualified to do any parenting at all. So yeah, I let him drink it. Because if there was anything in that glass,
well,
at least it wouldn't be killing the wrong person. He raised the glass. Toasted, once again, his imaginary millionaire son. Which, for anyone still trying to follow the plot, is me. A daughter. Who works in marketing. And rents. He looked so bloody pleased with himself. Like a child who's done something unspeakable with a marker pen and thinks he's created art. And then he drank. Big, smug gulp. The kind of sip you only take when you think you've won. When you think the game's rigged in your favor. When you think your daughter hasn't clocked the fact that you just tried to poison her in between mouthfuls of Aunt Liz's dry gammon. And then nothing. Just silence. That weird, thick, heavy silence that makes the air feel like it's watching you. Everyone carried on as normal. Cousin Dean was still droning on about crypto. Mum topped up the gravy. I stared at my wine glass like it owed me child support. And then, bam. 15 minutes later, he hit the floor like a scandal at a royal wedding. No warning. No build-up. 1 second he's quoting Thatcher for no reason, and the next he's face down in the carpet, twitching like someone had unplugged him mid-sentence. Forks clattered. Aunt Liz shrieked. Dean said bloody hell in a way that suggested it was more of a mild inconvenience than a potential homicide. And Mum? Mum looked down at him, exhaled slowly, like a woman watching her lasagna burn, and muttered, "Not again."
Not.
Again. I blinked.
Wait.
Again. Because apparently, this wasn't his first dramatic collapse at a family dinner. No, apparently poison-adjacent mystery floor moments were part of the greater Steve legacy, right alongside the time he tried to build a conservatory without planning permission and the Great Lasagna Fire of 2006. The paramedics were called. Mum was oddly calm. Too calm, actually, like a woman who's kept a laminated, in case of husband collapse, checklist next to the fridge magnets. Meanwhile, I was standing there, glass still in hand, heart doing backflips, pretending I hadn't just committed, well, whatever the legal term is for accidental revenge via wine swap. I felt sick. Not because of guilt that was still buffering, but because I honestly didn't know what the hell had just happened. Was he dead? Was I a murderer? Was I going to be interviewed on Good Morning Britain by Susanna Reid while she tilted her head at me in concern? And just like that, the chaos fully kicked off. Dean was useless. Liz was crying into a serviette that looked older than me. Mum finally sat down, sipped her wine like she was starring in her own ITV drama, and said, "He always has to ruin everything, doesn't he?" To which I replied, "Well, technically, this one wasn't my fault." Which, okay, was a choice of words. But honestly, what was I meant to say? Sorry I swapped the glasses you tried to drug me with. Hope you're not allergic to your own bullshit? Because here's the thing. I didn't want this. I didn't plan for this. I just didn't want to die in a cardigan over an MS roast chicken. And now I was sat across from my mother, watching the man who ruined my childhood being loaded into the back of an ambulance like a wheelie bin full of secrets, and she was sipping wine like she'd seen it all before. And maybe she had. Because once the sirens faded and the dust and gammon fat settled, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "You know, it was meant for you, right?" And just like that, happy birthday, Mum. Paramedics.
Panic.
Pudding uneaten. Dad on the carpet foaming like a bad cappuccino. Welcome to the incident. There we were, just moments away from dessert, the sacred finale to the most awkward Sunday roast known to man, and instead of digging into rhubarb crumble, we were watching Dad convulse next to the dog bowl. And look, I'm not saying I wanted him to collapse. But if you try to roofie your own daughter over Merlot and mutual resentment, then maybe what goes around does, occasionally, go down face first into the laminate flooring. The room turned into chaos in that slow-motion way British families do, where no one actually moves fast, they just start speaking louder and pointing. Aunt Liz clutched her pearls, literally. She bought them off QVC and never shuts up about it. Cousin Dean was pacing like he thought he was on casualty, except instead of helping, he kept shouting, "Breathe, mate," like Dad had simply forgotten how lungs work. And me? I just stood there, frozen, holding a half-eaten Yorkshire pud and the crushing realization that I had, technically, just poisoned my father. Accidentally. Sort of. Ish. And look, I've watched enough Netflix true crime to know this is exactly how the second episode starts. First, it's innocent wine swap. Next thing you know, I'm being interviewed by Piers Morgan with dramatic violin music in the background. My inner monologue had gone full chaos. Did I just kill him? Was this self-defense? Is that a thing when the weapon is Kiani? Do I need a solicitor? Or a therapist? Or both? The paramedics arrived. 2 of them, both clearly regretting every career choice that had led to this point. One stepped over the dog. The other asked, "What's he taken?" And without missing a beat, Mum said, whatever he meant for her. Cue every head in the room turning toward me. Me stood there, glass in one hand, regret in the other, suddenly center stage in the world's worst West End production. I cleared my throat. Well, if anyone's curious, the wine was a 2018 Merlot with top notes of betrayal and a long finish of generational trauma. No one laughed. Obviously.
Not the time.
One of the medics gave me a look. Not judgmental, just tired. The same look I imagine A&E staff give to people who fell on something suspicious and needed it surgically removed. Meanwhile, Dad was being hoisted onto the stretcher, still alive, still twitching, still managing to look like he was the victim.
Classic.
And here's the part one haven't told anyone. I felt nothing. Not guilt. Not panic. Not relief. Just flatness. Like every emotion had packed a bag and gone to Butlins for the weekend. Because the part they don't tell you in those family therapy books is what it feels like when the monster finally falls and you're not sure if you're supposed to cry, laugh, or call an estate agent. Mum followed them out, glass in hand like she was escorting a guest to their Uber. Liz muttered something about, the devil works hard, but family secrets work harder. And me? I just sat there, surrounded by half-eaten roasties, a trifle no one touched, and the creeping sense that I just crossed some kind of invisible line. And there was no going back. Hospital lights are the worst, aren't they? Too bright. Too sterile. Too exposing. Like they're not just illuminating the room, they're highlighting all your unresolved issues in 4K. We sat there in A&E. That special kind of silence where everything feels loud. Machines beeping. Heels clacking. Some bloke across the hall shouting about morphine and missing his Sky Sports subscription. And in the middle of it all, my dad. Hooked up to wires, heart rate monitor blipping away like it had a vendetta. He looked small. Not in the physical sense, he still had that post-roast bloat, but small in the human sense. Like someone had drained the arrogance out of him and left behind the husk of a man who'd peaked in 1997 and never emotionally matured past it. Aunt Liz was crying. Proper, wet, snotty sobs. Like she hadn't been slagging him off for the past 20 years, calling him a narcissistic sack of boiled ham and slacks. Now she was clutching tissues like a BAFTA nominee, wailing, he's still your dad, as if I'd personally unplugged him and replaced his blood with Duddle. Mum just sat quietly, legs crossed, hands folded, eyes fixed on the heart monitor, like she was watching a kettle boil. For poison. And me? I was trying not to unravel next to a broken vending machine that had eaten my pound coin and refused to vend the bloody Maltesers. The irony was rich. Whatever he put in my drink worked exactly as advertised. Just on the wrong recipient. And yes, I'd swapped the glasses. Yes, I'd seen him stir it like some Poundland Bond villain. Yes, I'd let him drink it. But he was the one who'd brought the poison to dinner. Literally and metaphorically. Mum leaned in eventually. Quiet. Careful. Voice soft like she was asking me to pass the salt at Sunday lunch. Was it you? She whispered. Just like that. I turned to her, deadpan. Define you. She didn't laugh. Obviously. Neither did I. Because it wasn't funny. Not really. Except it sort of was. In that bleak, British way where trauma comes with a punchline and we laugh at funerals because what else are we meant to do? She just nodded, like that told her everything she needed. And maybe it did. We didn't speak for a bit after that.
Just sat there.
Staring at the man who'd spent his entire life controlling the room, now lying motionless while his heart beeped in Morse code. I thought I'd feel something.
Guilt.
Relief.
Rage.
Closure, maybe. That mythical unicorn therapists keep promising like it's sold in Tesco meal deals. But I just felt empty, like someone had scooped out all the drama and left behind an echo. Because that's what no one tells you. When you finally stop the monster, there's no parade, no fanfare, just a plastic hospital chair digging into your thighs while you stare at a man who almost killed you and wonder if this is what healing is meant to look like. And somewhere, in that overlit silence, I realized
this wasn't the end.
Not even close. 3 days later, I finally confronted Mum. Because apparently, I needed time to emotionally process the fact that my family was one Bakewell tart away from a full Channel 5 documentary. We were in the conservatory. Of course we were. Because if you're going to drop a nuclear-level truth bomb, you might as well do it somewhere surrounded by wilting houseplants and passive-aggressive sunshine. She was watering the peace lily, which felt ironic. There was no peace. The lily was dead, and so was my remaining faith in anyone with a shared surname. I didn't even ease into it. No pleasantries. No fake "how are you coping?" nonsense. I just went, What the hell was in the wine? She didn't flinch, didn't drop the watering can, didn't even blink, just sighed, deeply, like I'd asked her to explain Wi-Fi passwords. And then she said it,
Plain. Quiet.
like she was reading it off the back of a cereal box. It was supposed to be for you, to stop you from telling the truth.
Oh.
Right then. Cool. I stared at her. Wow, I said. So now we poison family members for speaking inconvenient facts.
Classic.
Very Downton Abbey meets organized crime. She looked at me like I was being dramatic. Which, fair, but also, I'd been poisoned. I mean, what truth, exactly, was so terrifying she'd rather knock me out at Sunday lunch than let me say it out loud? What secret was worth sedating your own child over trifle? And suddenly it all clicked.
The lies.
The hush-ups. The don't talk about that in front of your cousins. The way she always changed the subject when Dad got that look in his eye. You know the one, like he'd just remembered something disgusting about you and was dying to share it over potatoes. She wasn't shocked when he collapsed. She wasn't even that upset. Because she knew. She knew what he was capable of. And worse, she'd helped. She called it protecting the family. I called it assault with a side of roast chicken. And honestly, I didn't even cry. There were no tears left. Just that hollow, brittle anger that sits in your chest like an unpaid council tax bill. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "You were going to let him do it." And she said, "I didn't think he'd go through with it." Which, let's be clear, is right up there with "I only cheated because I thought you'd never find out" on the list of deeply unhelpful post-betrayal soundbites. I laughed. Because what else can you do when your own mother admits she was complicit in your attempted Merlot ing? I laughed.
Ugly. Loud.
Unhinged. Like someone who's just realized they were raised by the love child of Mildred Pierce and Voldemort. And then I walked out. Didn't slam the door. Didn't throw anything. Just left. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in a family like mine is not play along. Let them keep their secrets. Let them water their dead lilies and pretend it's spring. I'd survived. And that was more than they ever planned for.
So.
Turns out dear old Dad wasn't just your average emotionally constipated narcissist with control issues and a mild wine problem.
No.
He was also a criminal. Kel surprise. Apparently, while the rest of us were just trying to survive family group chats and avoid conversations about bowel health over dinner, he was out here embezzling funds, laundering money, and hiding cash in offshore accounts like some discount Bond villain with a Greg's loyalty card. And when the heat came, when things started unraveling, he did what any honorable man would do. He blamed me.
Me.
His daughter. The one person in that entire mess who'd never even been trusted with a TV license, let alone international financial fraud. He claimed it was all my idea. Said I'd manipulated him emotionally, which, considering this is the man who once made me apologize to him for crying at my own GCSE results, is so rich it needs its own tax bracket.
Anyway.
There was a trial. Of course there was. Because when men like my father finally fall, they don't just trip over their lies. They stage dive into the consequences, dragging everyone down like a Poundland Greek tragedy. And the trial? It was a circus. Barristers with slick back hair and expressions like they'd rather be golfing. Mum in pearls, pretending she didn't once pour poison into a wine glass like it was Ribena.
Me?
I sat quietly, watching it unfold like I was the only person in the room not on ketamine.
He went down.
Not gracefully, not with dignity, but loudly, dragging metaphors, family shame, and his fake offshore retirement plan down with him. Mum testified. About everything.
About the fraud.
The cover-ups. The attempted poisoning, which, by the way, got dismissed as a moment of poor judgment under emotional strain. Yeah, try using that next time you're late with your rent. And me? I just sat there. Thinking about the wine, about the swap, about how close it was, how close I came to being silenced, to being blamed, to being buried under all the lies he built like dodgy IKEA furniture, no instructions, no support, and guaranteed to collapse under pressure. He raised a glass to his millionaire son. He didn't realize I'd already inherited his survival instincts. Only mine came with emotional intelligence and the ability to Google legal aid. And that's how I accidentally poisoned my dad at Sunday dinner, uncovered a massive fraud scandal, and realized I might just be the sanest person in my entire bloodline. No medals, no applause, just peace, and a very healthy mistrust of Merlot.